Hello, this is Evan Williams. It's been a while since my last story, but I've been incredibly busy. This is the first time I've been able to actually sit down, so now I'm going to spin another story for you. This one about animals, because lately I've been teaching these tiny little people. I have a new student, 5-year-old girl. It's the funnest thing I've ever done. After the lesson, I have so much more energy, so I always talk to her about animals. But I didn't tell her this story because it's more of like a story for older people, but this one's about an alligator. And when I used to live in Crimea in the south of Ukraine, I lived there for about 5 years. And I kept telling stories about alligators in Florida and in Miami and how often you see them and things they do, how sometimes they chase after joggers. And yeah, one time one alligator actually got a jogger while she was running, and she was probably playing with her cell phone. And they always get little dogs, and you read about this stuff in the newspaper, but you never actually see it or experience it. But you know it's real, because whenever you go to a lake anywhere, there's alligators everywhere. I used to go fishing all the time. When I was a teenager, I used to love going fishing. I'd go far out in this canoe, and if you're down in the Keys or if you're in Central Florida, any lake you go to, there's just gators everywhere, all over the place, alligators. And I used to have fun sometimes. I used to catch little fish, and then I used to use those fish as bait to catch gators. And I would never actually catch them, but I would love fighting them. It would be like fighting a shark. And they'd be twisting around in the water, and I'd be like, oh, I have an alligator. And I'd never actually get them. It was a really stupid thing to do, and you guys shouldn't try this ever. So, I've done a lot of stupid things, and if you look at the scars all over my face, you'll see that I'm telling the truth. Anyway, when I was in Crimea, I kept telling stories about alligators, and I told Galia this one story when I was about 13 years old. I would go down to this big lake in Central Florida. The name of the lake was Lake Apopka. And this lake was just filled with gators. It was just gator heaven. There was alligator gars, bowfins, bass, brim. And yeah, I used to do really stupid things, like catch little fish and then throw those fish right at a gator, and the gator would eat it, and I'd be fighting the gator, and the gator would be rolling around, and finally my line would snap. And so one day in our neighborhood, there was this killer gator. He was huge. Must have been 16 feet, maybe bigger. Very fat, like a car. This thing must have been eating cows, I don't know. But we used to call this gator Goliath whenever we would see him. He was like the granddaddy of all gators. He was just like, he would control the whole lake. And so what happened was, slowly but surely, one by one, these dogs started to disappear from off of our block. First was like a Doberman Pinscher, quite a big dog. Then 2 Rottweilers. And then after about 6 or 7 months, people were thinking, where are all of these dogs disappearing to? And these dogs, of course, would run down to the lake, play in the water. Well, of course, Goliath has been eating all of these dogs. And we finally figured it out, because after about 6 months, Goliath's belly went from like this to boom, like he had a car inside of him. He was huge. And so I used to have a 22 bolt action rifle, and I used to love going target practice. So I said to my family, I'm going to go shoot Goliath. I'm going to kill him, and I'm going to bring him back home. So I put on my little Dia Fielder hunting hat, and I put on some camouflage, and I got my gun ready. And at 22, it's quite a big gun for a 13-year-old. It's like, and it's quite a dangerous bullet, especially if you hit the gator in the middle of the head or in the eyes. So I went out and I wanted to kill Goliath. And my brothers were like, no. And Goliath lived out in the swamps. Like the swamps went into the lake. So I started trekking through the swamps looking for Goliath. And then finally I went down to the lake, where the lake was, and it had a little sandy beach and a lot of bushes. And there I'm going through the bushes, and I'm looking for Goliath. And the weirdest thing, I was so lucky. And if this hadn't happened, I'd be dead now. But I walked behind one bush, and I walked behind another bush, and I was real quiet. And the third bush I walked around, there was Goliath laying right in front of me. I almost stepped on him. And he was sleeping. Of course, after he ate like 3 or 4 dogs, he just like He didn't need to hunt anymore. He could sleep for 2 years. So he was there, laying there, getting sun. But thanks be to God, his face wasn't facing me. As soon as I walked upon him, I walked upon his tail. And there his head was way down there. And all I saw was this huge body. It was like gigantic. And I was like, man, am I going to shoot him? Oh, well, that's why I came for. I came here to kill Goliath. I'd be like the neighborhood hero. In fact, I'd be in the newspapers if I finally got Goliath. The reason why we had to get rid of Goliath is because people in this neighborhood had children. And these children were always going down to the lake. And people came to the simple conclusion that since Goliath was eating Rottweilers and big dogs, well, he's going to eat these little children too. In fact, he'd probably attack an adult. So Goliath finally tasted the blood, and we needed to get rid of Goliath. And I was the only one that was out there trying to, make an attempt to kill Goliath. Of course, I didn't tell anybody about this, but my parents would never let me do this. Anyway, I'm down there, and I'm like, all right, well, here he is. I'm going to kill him. So I bolted my .22, I pumped in the .22, and I was like pointing at him. I was like, well, there's his head. Ka-boom! I shot, and the bullet was like, bing! And Goliath, nothing. I shot again, bing! Ricochet. Everything ricocheting. I shot again, bing! And Goliath was like iron. My .22 bullets were like little mosquitoes crawling on his head. He's like, ha ha, who's this idiot? All he had to do was turn around and just eat me. So I was like, I'm going to come back. So I went back into the swamp. I went back home and I told my brothers, I found Goliath. And I've been shooting him, but he doesn't seem to care. My brothers were like, no, take me there. Take me with you. So we went back into the swamp and I showed him. We went around one bush, around the second bush. I was like, he's behind that other bush. And we finally saw behind that bush this giant black thing, like a gigantic tire. I was like, well, that's Goliath's belly, and all the dogs are in there. And my brothers finally saw, yeah, that's Goliath. And my brother was like, well, let me try. He pumped one, shot Goliath, bing, ricochet, and Goliath's just sitting there, not even moving. He doesn't even care the sound. So I said, well, we cannot kill him. We have to call the wildlife services of Florida, who come and they take care of this business. Because the whole problem was to locate Goliath. Once we locate him, we can find somebody to get him. So we called this Environmental Services of Florida that take care of wild game, and we told them the story. Goliath has been killing all the dogs in the neighborhood, and it's going to get the children. So this guy came who works for the state of Florida in this big camouflaged Jeep 4x4. And I'm looking at this, he has all this equipment and stuff. He's like, I'm a professional gator hunter. I'm going to get Goliath. And he's like, we got to get rid of him. So he pulls out this big bucket. And this bucket, I was like, what's in there? He's like, old rotten meat. I was like, ugh. So he opens it up, and there's the worst smell ever. There's been like rotten meat that's been sitting there for a couple months and flies everywhere. I was like, oh, what are you going to do with that? He's like, well, alligators love this stuff. We're going to feed Goliath and get him out. I was like, well, how? He takes out this big hook. He's like, well, I'm going to hook the meat. I'm going to put the meat on this hook, and when I throw it to Goliath, he's going to smell it and devour it. And the hook's going to go in there, and I'm going to get him out. I was like, well, how are you going to get him out? Goliath is like the size of 2 cars. He's like, well, that's why I have my 4x4. I'm going to hook up this hook to a metal chain, and that's going to hook up to my 4x4, and we're going to get Goliath out. I was like, I'd like to see this. So he did it. He got gloves on. He took the disgusting meat. It was like worse than Ukrainian salo. And he hooked it, and there Goliath is sitting there, and he throws the meat into the water. And there's just this great smell in the water. And other gators started to get really excited. But no. Goliath was not going to let other gators get his meat. So he starts pulling the meat towards Goliath's face. And Goliath is like, whoa. Gets into the water. Kaboom! Eats the meat. The man starts up his 4x4, puts it in 4-wheel drive, and starts going forward. But he's like in very swampy area, so his tires start spinning. I was like, look at that! The 4x4 can't even pull Goliath out of the water. Goliath's going to pull him in. the 4x4 started going back because Goliath was in the water and he was going crazy. He had this hook in his mouth. Goliath was going like somebody who had too much to eat at New Year's, a little bit too much to drink. Goliath was going nuts, and this 4x4, the tires were spinning. I was like, look, he's going to pull the guy into the water. Goliath's going to win again, and Andy's going to eat the guy. So finally, the guy was like, help, help. So we started grabbing sticks and grabbing all of this, anything raw and dry from the forest. We were dragging it out and putting it under his tires. And finally, the tires started getting on some of this dry stuff, big sticks and boards, that it started to win. And Goliath was coming out of the lake. And the 4x4 very slowly was going forward. And as soon as we got Goliath out of the lake, he started spinning and spinning. And he was trying to hit everybody with his tail. He was furious because he totally didn't want to go. But we finally got Goliath. What happened after that, I can't tell you. It's kind of like a sad ending to the story. But when I was in Alushta in Crimea, I always used to tell Galia these stories. And I promised Galia that after the Peace Corps, since she had totally supported me for like 3 years, I was like, I'm going to take you to USA. And I'm going to show you that when we drive down the street, you can see alligators on the side of the road. And she was like, oh, heaven, Sichinito, apiet, Sichinito. I was like, Kuk Sichinito, come and I'll show you. I was like, I'm not making this up. These are true stories. She's like, oh, Sichinito. Oh, you're making it up. Oh, another one of your stories. Like, okay, get your visa to USA. Galia got a visa to USA. It was the most amazing thing. I didn't think she was going to get a visa. But she went into the American embassy in Kyiv, and they're like, well, why should we give you a visa? And she's like, well, I've been helping this Peace Corps volunteer, Evan. She said, yeah, Evan Williams, the Peace Corps volunteer. You know, we've been watching out for him in Alushta for more than 3 years. He's like, all right, you got yourself a visa. Galia came back to Alushta all happy. She finally got an American visa. I was like, hey, Galia, let's go to USA. Let's go to Miami. I'm going to take you driving down Alligator Alley. When you drive down Alligator Alley, there are gators everywhere. They even cross the road. Up where my mom lives in Central Florida, yeah, when you drive to the beach, there's a canal on the left and there's a canal on the right. And when the gators get hot, they come up out of the canal and they sunbathe. And it's right near the road. And I told Galia this. She's like, no, I don't believe you. I was like, okay, I'll show you. So she finally gets to Florida and she feels the heat. I was like, we're going to the beach today, Galia. And I'm with my wife and I'm with Linda and I'm with Galia and my mom is there. And I know exactly where this one big fat alligator lives. So we're driving down to the beach. This is near John F. Kennedy Space Center. This is a big zapovednik. It's like a sanctuary. And so we're driving there, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, peripheral vision, I see something black and something big. I'm like, well, that's a tire from an 18-wheeler, or that's a really big gator. So I start to slow the car down, and I look again. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a big fat gator. And I pull the car over, and I put it in park. I put on my emergency lights, and I say, Galia, we're driving to the beach. Look on the side of the road. Big fat alligator. And Galia looks. She's like, oh, Boże moi. And we always used to sing these songs about Chunga Changa and about Africa. And I was telling Galia, well, Florida is a lot like this. You see, big snakes and alligators. And she never believed me. So I said, Galia, we have to get out of the car. We're going to visit him. So we all got out of the car. We walked across the road and we crept up on this gator. And as soon as we started, the gator saw that we were walking towards him. He got up. I was like, uh-oh. He's either going to kill us or he's going to run away. But I was like, I know these gators. He's going to run away. So he got up and Galia was totally freaked out. She started to step back. I was like, Galia, they love eating Russians. So she started to back up and the gator, he ran away into the water and made this really big splash. We all got back in the car, and I said, Galia, who's Sichinito now? I didn't make the story up. I told you these were true stories. And Galia was like, oh, I can't believe it. Alligators on the side of the road, sleeping while we're driving down to the beach. Anyway, that's the alligator story. I hope you enjoyed. And if you like more animal stories, more will come. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.